Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into a really significant topic, the upcoming second Trump administration. We've gathered, well, quite a few recent analyses and reports.
That's right.
The goal here is to give you a clear picture, cut through the noise and focus on the key aspects, the potential impacts. Think of it as your concise briefing.
Absolutely. And we've pulled from a lot of different places to do that.
Hmm.
There's news analysis from RNZ, official stuff from the Department of Justice, a paper from the Finnish Institute of International Affairs.
FAIA, right?
Yeah, FIA.
Huh.
Plus, info on Project 2025, Reddit discussions, which can be quite insightful sometimes, Wikipedia entries, articles from Politico, Earth.org, CREW, Capital B News, the Global Treasurer, even the White House archives for some context.
So, a real mix. Our mission then is to pull out the most important insights, maybe flag some potential challenges, and highlight anything surprising about this next administration. We want to give you that well-informed perspective.
Let's do it.
Okay, so where do we start? How about the transition itself and preparedness?
Right. Well, the first thing that jumps out, compared to the first term, is that sources like that FEIA paper suggest they're, well, more prepared this time around.
More prepared how? Like concrete plans?
Yeah, more outline plans, personnel
Mhm.
seem to be more identified. It's different from the first transition, which, many people saw as lacking that kind of solid operational blueprint right out of the gate.
Okay, that's interesting, a definite shift. But doesn't the FEIA report also mention a risk of chaotic decision-making,
Yeah.
even with the planning?
It does, yeah. And the thinking there seems to be the heavy emphasis on personal loyalty to Trump.
Ah, okay.
So you can have plans, sure, but if the key people are chosen primarily for loyalty over, say, deep institutional knowledge or specific expertise, you could still get some volatility. It introduces a different kind of potential disruption, you see.
Yeah, that tracks. So formal structures might be there, but the loyalty factor could still make things unpredictable. RNZ News also mentioned something about Trump thinking about his legacy, wanting something more robust this time.
That's right. He seems aware of his place in history, or wants to be. This desire for a stronger legacy. It could push things in a couple of directions, really.
Like what? More conventional, maybe?
Maybe, in some ways. But it could also mean a real push for big, sweeping changes done quickly, which might be why RNZ anticipates this uh, blast of executive power.
A blast of executive power. That sounds dramatic, but wouldn't that face some pushback?
Oh, definitely. RNZ points out the slim GOP majority in the House that limits legislative options. And then there's the potential for Democrats to do well in the 2026 midterms, which could, really change the game later on.
So executive actions look like they'll be key, and we're already seeing hints of that, right, with Pam Bondi at the DOJ.
Exactly. The Attorney General dismissing those DEI lawsuits, diversity, equity, and inclusion related to police and firefighters. It's a clear, quick move to follow through on Trump's stated goal of ending what they see as unlawful DEI policies.
And it feels like part of a bigger plan, which brings us to Project 2025.
Yes, absolutely central to understanding what's potentially coming.
Okay, so Project 2025. Give us the nutshell version for anyone who hasn't heard much about it.
Sure. Um, Basically, it's this huge collaborative effort. Over 100 conservative groups involved. They've put together a massive policy blueprint and also lists of personnel they recommend for the next conservative administration. It's their vision for how government should run.
100 groups. Wow, and who are the key players behind this?
You see some familiar names and some really influential figures. Russell Vought, he was Trump's OMB director, now reappointed, and he also founded the Center for Renewing America, which is core to Project 2025.
Okay.
And Stephen Miller, widely expected to have a big policy role, probably focused on immigration or maybe homeland security. There are also notable connections to groups pushing Christian nationalist ideas, which gives you a sense of the ideological drive behind some of it.
So it's not just policy papers, it's about getting the right people in place too. I saw something about changing federal staffing, Schedule F.
Yes, that's absolutely fundamental. Schedule F is this proposal to reclassify potentially, tens of thousands of career civil servants.
Reclassify how? What does that mean practically?
It means they could potentially be easier to fire and replace, essentially ensuring more loyalty to the president's agenda. They've reportedly even used questionnaires to screen potential hires for alignment.
Hmm.
But the bigger thing about Schedule F, perhaps, isn't just replacing people. It's the potential chilling effect, right? Civil servants might hesitate to give honest but politically unwelcome advice. Could lead to groupthink.
That could really change the culture inside government agencies. So what specific policies are they pushing in Project 2025? Sounds like it covers a lot.
It really does. For agencies, take the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. They want changes to make it easier to fire people there, get rid of DEI initiatives. There's this view among some conservatives that the NIH has become too political.
Okay, NIH. What else? Immigration must be in there.
Oh, heavily, likely with Miller's influence. Big reforms proposed, including one really controversial idea, potentially withholding FEMA disaster relief funds.
Withholding disaster relief.
Yeah, from states or cities, jurisdictions that don't fully cooperate with federal immigration enforcement, using it as leverage.
Wow, okay. That's a powerful tool. What about social issues?
Clear stance against what they call radical gender ideology. They want marriage defined based on biblical principles, DEI programs gone from all federal agencies, and defining sex as binary via executive order.
A binary definition by executive order, what would that affect?
Potentially quite a lot. Things like passports, maybe even how federal employees have to identify themselves in official emails, like signatures. Pretty direct impacts.
And it goes beyond domestic policy too, right? Defense, foreign policy.
Definitely. Project 2025 talks about a dramatic buildup of nuclear weapons, prioritizing new ones, rejecting arms control treaties.
So rejecting treaties.
That seems to be the direction. Also, ending DEI in the Defense Department, reinstating service members kicked out for refusing the COVID vaccine. And interestingly, specifically, not considering climate change as a factor in national security planning.
That's a fundamental shift. Okay, so we have this big plan, Project 2025, and now we're seeing cabinet appointments starting to line up with it.
Seems that way, yes.
Yeah.
The names coming out often reflect these priorities. We've got Brooke Rollins from the America First Policy Institute for Agriculture, Howard Lutnick, a businessman, for Commerce.
Tulsi Gabbard for D&I, that was a bit of a surprise to some.
It was. Then Kristi Noem for Homeland Security, Lee Zeldin for the EPA, Scott Besson for Treasury, Pam Bondi, as we said, for Attorney General, Doug Burgum at Interior.
And then there's the Health and Human Services pick.
Right, RFK Jr. That's obviously drawn a lot of attention. Given his views on vaccines and public health agencies, it signals a potentially very different direction for HHS.
A very different direction.
Then you have Linda McMahon for Education, Doug Collins for VA Secretary, Jameson Greer as U.S. Trade Representative, Kelly Loeffler running the Small Business Administration. And Pete Hegseth's name is linked to potential big cuts at the Pentagon, maybe even as Acting Defense Secretary.
So the team seems to be assembling, reflecting these Project 2025 goals. Okay,
Yeah.
let's shift focus slightly. The America First idea that's coming back strong, presumably.
Well, almost certainly. The FEIA paper points to this continued focus on reducing America's international burdens, expecting allies to pay more, do more.
Which could cause some friction.
Potentially, yes. A tension between the domestic America First push and, the realities of global diplomacy and security needs. Marco Rubio had that America's First foreign policy site, which isn't up now, but the name tells you the likely direction.
Right. Okay, back home then, deregulation. We expect more of that. How might they approach it this time?
Sources suggest they'll keep rolling back Biden-era executive actions. One tactic might be using abeyances in court. Yeah, basically asking courts to pause lawsuits against existing regulations. That gives the new administration time to write their own replacement rules.
Clever.
And then there's the Congressional Review Act, the CRA. That's a powerful one. Lets Congress kill recently finalized regulations with just a simple majority vote. And importantly, it stops agencies from issuing similar rules later.
So a multi-pronged approach. And Schedule F fits in here too.
Exactly. Reclassifying civil servants, it's all part of gaining more control over the bureaucracy, which ties into deregulation efforts.
We saw some of this with environmental rules before, didn't we? The Clean Power Plan.
We did. Remember the shift to the Affordable Clean Energy, or ACE, rule? Less strict?
Yeah.
The legal battles around that,
Okay.
and the Supreme Court eventually establishing the major questions doctrine.
Right, the idea that agencies need clear permission from Congress for really big actions.
Precisely. It highlights the kind of legal fights and constraints these big regulatory shifts can run into.
Okay, let's talk economy. Scott Bessent, the Treasury nominee, is outlining the vision. What are the headlines?
Well, drawing from the global treasurer and places like Reddit, it looks very likely we'll see new trade restrictions, new tariffs.
Tariffs again, Trump's favorite word, as you mentioned.
Exactly. And that could easily spark retaliation from Mexico, Canada, China, like we saw last time. On Reddit, you see people discussing the potential fallout inflation worries, impacts on specific sectors.
And then there's this, DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. with Elon Musk.
Yeah, that's definitely raised eyebrows. DOGE is pitched as this temporary body to find cost savings, modernize government tech, Musk as administrator.
But there are concerns.
Big concerns. Reports suggest his allies might get key spots in agencies handling personnel and government services, access to sensitive data, Treasury payment systems.
Yeah.
Senator Ron Wyden flagged major national security risks.
And what about these unusual HR ideas, deferred resignation?
Right. Reports that the Personnel Office, OPM, offered some federal employees a deal, resign, but keep getting paid for a while. Trump also talked about canceling union contracts agreed late in the previous administration.
But there's pushback. Courts stepping in.
There has been, yes. Courts have ruled against attempts to fire employees just by claiming generally poor performance in some departments. So these workforce changes might face legal challenges too.
Okay, so a mix of bold economic moves and potential roadblocks. What about social issues? Abortion, healthcare, LGBTQ plus rights, always major points of change.
On abortion, Trump's public stance is leaving it to the states. He even criticized that Arizona ruling. Remember, he says no federal ban, but it's suggested states could monitor pregnancies.
Monitor pregnancies.
That's what was reported, yes. Openness to states doing that. In healthcare, the RFK Jr. appointment is huge. Signals a likely shift away from established public health approaches, maybe more focus on choice and transparency, but with his known skepticism.
It's a significant change. And DEI.
Moving fast on that. Actions against DEI initiatives in agencies like the CDC and that executive order defining sex as binary, we're already seeing impacts on passports, pronouns for federal employees.
Immigration was huge in the first term, expecting more of the same.
It's like it. Reviving and expanding policies, travel bans, asylum restrictions, more deportations. Tom Homan is back as a border czar. Talk of ending the migrant entry app, declaring a border emergency.
Focus on deporting specific groups.
Focus on gang members, yes. But also mentions of gold card visas for the wealthy.
Right.
Interestingly, though, some initial reports suggest deportation numbers are actually lower than the previous year so far.
And LGBTQ plus rights. Seems like a rollback is intended.
The signs point that way, unfortunately for advocates. Opposition to gender-affirming care, talk of federal bans for minors, defunding services. That binary sex definition is key. And revoking Biden's order allowing transgender people in the military.
Okay, let's pivot to foreign policy. We're seeing moves already. Ukraine.
Yeah, reports that Trump told Putin to make a deal now or face tougher sanctions. There's been talk about Ukraine's rare earth minerals. Relations with Zelensky seems strained. Focus seems to be on ceasefire talks, maybe closer ties with Russia. But it's complex. Conflict flared up again.
Beyond Ukraine, where else is getting attention?
Well, South Africa addressing what they called egregious actions. The ambassador was asked to leave. Potential deal with the DRC over minerals. Gaza initially gave Netanyahu a deadline, then talked about the U.S. taking over redevelopment, but ceasefires keep breaking down.
What about Syria, Yemen, Iran?
Indicated the U.S. should stay out of Syria fighting, but launched airstrikes on Houthis in Yemen. Reportedly sent a letter to Iran's supreme leader, make a nuclear deal or risk bombing, even offered to mediate between India and China.
And trade conflicts. Tariffs specifically aimed at certain countries.
Mexico, Canada, China are the main ones mentioned. Raises the specter of trade wars, retaliation. There was even talk of creating an external revenue service just for tariffs.
Canada seems to be getting a lot of focus, maybe not all positive.
Right. Reviving the Monroe Doctrine in relation to Canada. Suggestions they could be kicked out of the Five Eyes intelligence group. Jokes about Canada becoming the 51st state, which apparently didn't go over well with Trudeau privately. Trade disputes, energy issues. It's a complicated picture.
And then the really out there ideas. Greenland, Panama Canal.
The Greenland acquisition idea is back, apparently with a potential new name. Red, white, and blue lands. That's what's reported.
Yeah.
And interest in retaking control of the Panama Canal, with the Pentagon supposedly looking at military options to guarantee U.S. access.
Wow, okay. It's ambitious and unconventional on the world stage, but we also need to touch on concerns about potential corruption, ethical issues, even constitutional questions.
Yes, groups like CUW are raising alarms. Mar-a-Lago becoming a hub for official and business meetings raises obvious conflict of interest questions, worries about the DOJ being used against political opponents.
And ethics rules?
Reports suggest a loosening of ethics rules, potentially making it easier to profit from the presidency. Things like Trump media gifting shares, launching a crypto coin. Some commentators are using strong terms like administrative self-coup or state capture.
Strong words indeed. How's the public feeling about all this heading in?
The initial inaugural approval rating was historically quite low. But some early polls showed positive approval in the first few weeks. One poll called it an energetic start, suggesting maybe some initial momentum.
Okay, one last thing. That FII paper mentioned viewing the administration through a fail-fast lens, like Silicon Valley.
It's an interesting framing. Suggests an approach that embraces disruption, rapid policy changes, maybe even tolerates some risk and failure to get quick results.
Like trying things out, seeing what sticks, even if it's meshy.
Kind of viewing uncertainty, maybe even a bit of chaos, as just part of the process to achieve big changes fast. It could mean quick implementation, quick assessment, quick adjustments, even if there are mistakes along the way.
Okay, so pulling it all together, this deep dive suggests what? A second Trump administration that's maybe more prepared on paper than the first.
Right, with things like Project 2025.
But still potentially unpredictable because of that loyalty focus and a willingness to break norms. Expect lots of executive power, the Project 2025 agenda being pushed hard, America first, driving policy, deregulation, big economic and social shifts.
Exactly, and lots of potential tension points, right? Between the goals and the reality of Congress or the courts,
Hmm.
between different internal priorities,
Hmm.
between their agenda and international norms or allies.
Yeah. For me, the big takeaways are the sheer scale of Project 2025's planning, the potential for really rapid, direct changes to federal agencies and staff Schedule F, the DEI reversals, and just how fundamentally they seem willing to rethink foreign policy, even with close allies.
And hopefully for you listening, this gives you a solid base, a way to follow what happens next with a bit more context to see the bigger picture behind the headlines.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. Given everything we've discussed, this huge agenda, the likely challenges, the legal fights, the global reaction, what do you think will be the single biggest factor determining if they actually achieve these goals? And thinking about that fail fast idea, what unintended consequences might pop up from that kind of disruptive approach to governing? Definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.